Thanks for joining us this afternoon for the audit committee. We'll go ahead and get started with the first business item, the state auditor's entrance conference with Stephanie Kruger and Zachary Boucher.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Kruger. I'm the audit director from the Office of the State Auditor, and with me is Zach Boucher. He is the lead auditor. And so we are just meeting with you today to talk about this year's audit and provide a two-way means of communication with those charged with governance for matters related to the financial statement audit. I believe in your board packets you should have our entrance meeting agenda. I will go through some of it. I won't go through the entire thing in detail. This is really just a summary of the engagement letter, which has already been signed and returned to us. So just jumping in, under staffing and administration, the staffing from the state auditor's office will remain fairly consistent with last year. We have a couple new auditors who joined us, but largely the same team. We've already started our initial audit planning, updating our system narratives, and performing some of our testing. Our audit work will be based on the scheduled completion dates, which we have been provided. The next section talks about the statement on auditing standards. It says AUC section 260, which is the auditor's communication with those charged with governance. Auditing standards define those charged with governance and establishes communication requirements between us, the auditors, and those charged with governance. At the Metropolitan Council, we've identified those charged with governance as the members of the Metropolitan Council and the Audit Committee. The next section, the audit scope and objectives and auditors' responsibilities under generally accepted auditing standards. We will be forming and expressing opinions about whether the financial statements are presented fairly in conformity with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, and will report on the fairness of the supplementary information. We will issue two opinions. The first is on the financial statements, and then the second one is on the federal program requirements. We will also report on the Metropolitan Council's internal controls over both the financial reporting and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and award agreements, and also controls over compliance related to major federal programs we audit. We do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control, however. Our audit will be performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, the Single Audit Act, uniform guidance, and the Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit Guide for other political subdivision. The next section talks about the responsibilities of management. They're responsible for designing, implementing, establishing, and maintaining effective internal controls, identifying any significant contractor relationships where the responsibility for program compliance has been given to them, making all financial records and related information available to us and for the accuracy and completeness of that information, providing us with access to all information required for our audit, adjusting financial statements to correct material misstatement if there is any, designing and implementing programs and controls to prevent and detect fraud, and then informing us about those. Identifying and ensuring that the Metropolitan Council complies with any laws, regulations, contracts, agreements, and grants. Evaluating and monitoring non-compliance. Providing us with other documents that use or make reference to our auditor's report or audited financial statements prior to their issuance. Identifying all federal awards received and understanding and complying with the compliance requirements, preparing the required supplementary information, establishing and maintaining a process for tracking the status of any audit findings, identifying and providing us with report copies of previous financial audits, attestation agreements, performance audits, or other studies that are related to the objectives of our audit, providing management's views on findings at the end of the audit, and then also signing a management representation letter. The next section, other services, just talks about if any non-audit services were to be provided for the Metropolitan Council. There are other requirements that you would need to acknowledge. Because we don't provide any non-audit services, we'll just skip over that section. Under the overview of the plan, scope, and timing of the audit, we will be auditing the basic financial statements of the Metropolitan Council for the year ended December 31st of 2024. The level of federal funding is greater than $750,000, so they will receive a single audit. The council again will seek the Government Financial Officers Association, the GFOA Certificate of Achievement, which means the final annual comprehensive report has to be submitted by June 30th of 2025. We will also apply procedures to the Financial Data Schedule, the FDS, to determine whether it's fairly stated in relation to the financial statements. So we compare the electronic submission of items identified by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Real Estate Assessment Center with the corresponding written documents from the audit. We plan to begin the audit of the FDS approximately the middle of April, which is after the REAC submission and the HRA fund is complete. And then we plan to issue our opinion and certify the REAC in conjunction with the Metropolitan Council's opinion. We will also apply certain agreed upon procedures to the data used in the federal funding allocation statistic forms, which are included in the National Transit Database, the NTD reports for both the Metropolitan Council and the Metro Transit. We will start this work beginning in April, and then we are required to submit our report by the closeout date of July 15th. So we hope to issue our final NTD report no later than June 30th. To the extent possible, we will be conducting our audit procedures remotely, but if at any point it becomes necessary to come on site, we will coordinate with the appropriate staff. Our preliminary audit plan has us completing our field work by the end of May. That is dependent on the scheduled completion dates, and then if all goes as planned, we expect to issue our opinion and our management and compliance report by June 30th. Like I mentioned before, we've already received the signed engagement letter back. And then the next section is on the federal single audit. For 2024, the Metropolitan Council is not considered to be a low-risk auditee because of qualified opinion on the housing choice voucher cluster back in 2022, which means we'll be required to test 40% of federal expenditures. Instead of just 20% if it wasn't high risk. We could be required to test more if a type A program has not been audited in the last 2 years, or if a program is determined to be high risk. Since the council expended more than $100 million but less than $1 billion, the type A threshold is those exceeding $3 million for 2024. So those are the programs that need to be audited once every 3 years. And the program we've selected this year to be tested is a transit cluster, which has several ALN numbers. We anticipate that this program will be more than adequate to meet that 40% testing threshold. However, this is subject to change based on information obtained during the audit and then final amounts reported on the CEFA. There's the potential we could pick up another program.
Okay, under item 5, status of prior year findings. We did have one finding in 2023 related to the federal award we audited, which was the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Our finding was related to source documentation over elements of eligibility. We will be performing follow-up testing over this in 2024, but the program itself will not be audited as a major program. Item number 6 are the new GASB pronouncements. I won't go over each of these, but we have communicated with management in detail about these, but to make the audit committee aware, for 2024, GASB 101 and GASB 102 will be implemented. And for 2005, GASB 103 and 104 will be early implemented. Under section 7, Metropolitan Council always has the option for us to present this to the full council. However, in the past, we have just provided notes in an email after this meeting. Will that suffice as well this year?
That should be fine. Yeah, that should be fine.
Great. And then the next item there, under B, we just have some questions about the audit committee's view and knowledge of fraud. So I'll just start reading them. Please interject if you have any questions. What are your views about the risks of fraud?
The audit committee generally delegates responsibility for mitigation of fraud risk to management and the audit team. However, employees and members of the public can and do periodically contact council members with concerns. We're comfortable that the council has adequate controls in place for fraud reporting and fraud mitigation.
Great. And do you have any knowledge of actual, suspected, or alleged fraud affecting the entity or its federal program?
No, not that we're aware of.
Do you have any knowledge of any possible or actual non-compliance or abuses of programs and controls occurring during the period being audited or the subsequent period?
No, not that we're aware of.
What is the council's role in the oversight of management's processes for identifying and responding to fraud risks? Does the council take an active role in establishing policies and procedures to mitigate fraud risks? And how does the council oversee the established policies and procedures that are in place?
As mentioned, the audit committee generally delegates responsibility for fraud mitigation to management and the audit team. Consistent with our audit committee charter, we approve the annual audit plan and hear results of audit work, some of which focuses on mitigating fraud risk, including through thorough review of adherence to written policies and procedures.
Is the entity in compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements?
Yes, as far as we know.
And is there anything else that you would like to add or anyone else you think we should talk to regarding fraud?
No.
And are there any other questions, comments, or concerns?
No.
Are any other questions for us?
Any other questions from committee members? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So for the federal single audit being considered a high risk, would this be the last year then, am I understanding that correctly, that would be considered high risk if there is not an exception identified?
Correct. If there are no other issues that come up during this year's audit, that high risk status will come up for next year.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? All right, thank you, Stephanie and Zach.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the chief audit. Oh, that's right. Earlier we didn't have quorum, so we're gonna circle back to the approval of the agenda and the December 2nd audit committee meeting. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I consider them approved. Any other edits or amendments to the December 17th committee minutes? All right.
Motion to.
Oh, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in
We have to
favor?
wait with that though too.
Say that again.
Don't we have to wait with the minutes, approval of the minutes?
We have a quorum.
Oh, we do have a quorum, I'm sorry, misunderstood.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Next up, we are going to the reports, and the first one is the Chief Audit Executive's report, audit framework with mandatory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Happy to have you all here again for another audit committee meeting. Got a couple of items to go over, and I'm going to blend a little bit the CAE report with the next item, which is the EQA response, because there's a lot of overlap in terms of how I'm going to, I think, really going forward, present on our departmental progress, looking with an eye towards how we're responding to our EQA. So forgive me in advance if there's a little bit of duplication, and at some point I'll ask Tim and Brandon, they're going to come up and help me out on the EQA presentation. So, but I'm going to try to get this right in my head and present all the information in somewhat of a linear fashion. So the first thing I do want to go over though is unrelated. It's about the audit committee. So just kind of a reminder to this committee that we have a little bit of expected turnover this year. We have two council members, Councilmember Dolkar, who has left the council, and Councilmember Vento, who is expected to leave the council when the governor appoints a new member in her position. So that'll leave us with two council member vacancies. The chair is planning to fill those when the new council members are appointed the council. So expected at least 2 new members to the committee that way. We have a solicitation, as we've expected every 2 years, we're gonna be appointing 2 new members or have solicitations for 2 new members. We have 2 members of this committee, Committee Member Galswick and Committee Member Jorgensen, whose terms are up for renewal. I will say, and I've asked for permission, Committee Member Galswick has declined to apply again for another term because he's got a lot of other things going on, and we certainly appreciate, and I just want to take a moment here to reflect on the past 6 years and all the insight, expertise you brought to this committee, and I think made all of us sharper, better. I shared privately, but I think I hear a lot of feedback that senior management at the council really view this committee as one of the sharpest and most interesting committees that we have. And so I think that's really a credit to our community members, all of them, and especially Quinn, who served so well for 6 years. So I just want to thank you publicly for your service and wish you well in the future, and look forward to working with you again in other capacities.
Councilmember Vinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this your last meeting then, Quinn?
I'm told that it is possible that it'll be my last meeting, because I will hold it similar to you until somebody else is appointed.
Okay.
And if I may, just real
Yeah, go
briefly, I wanna say that I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this committee. I joined the committee because I really believed in the vital importance of the Metropolitan Council for the vitality of our region, and frankly our state. And serving on this committee, I'm only more convinced of how important regional planning is and all of the functions that the Metropolitan Council does. So thank you to everybody in this room for coming. Thank you for all the reports that you've provided me. Thank you for all the information. It's been a heck of an educational experience for me on multiple levels. I really, really appreciate it. So, and I'll continue to work with you in some fashion or another in the years to come. So thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Councilmember Vinton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't know when my last meeting will be either, Quinn, so we're kind of in the same
Yeah,
boat,
I'm assuming this will be.
But I just want to note, and I think I've said this before, but those of you who are public members of this committee bring so much to the conversation. Your questions, your ideas, your insights, just so much, so thank you. If you ever need a recommendation to audit the Doge group in Washington, I'll gladly give you one.
I will not respond to that.
Okay, good. Sorry.
I'm gonna take a pass on that one too. So
Bad joke.
appreciate the acknowledgements. Turning the page to the next term, there's a posting on our website. I'll share this with committee members, so you're aware, but to solicit for the 2 positions. We're just shared with a few people that I know, since Quinn let me know that I think might be good quality candidates that would fill the position and play the role very well. So there'll be a similar process to the last time and every time we've solicited for audit committee members. And I think the process we're hoping to finish in the next month or 2. So I would expect that by the next meeting we'd have the members seated. And I await the governor's direction in terms of whether we're prepared for the next meeting with the other committee members. Committee members potentially moving on. Sort of tying this together with our audit framework, and this is where things will get a little bit out of order. I planned in this meeting bringing the audit framework, which is our audit policy, our committee charter, and our department charter, those 3 documents for consideration. But given the changeover in committee, I really thought it made more sense to bring those at the first meeting when we have a fully new staffed committee. I think we would have done that anyway if we would have even had them approved. So we'll plan on doing that in June rather than today. I do expect for those of you who continue to serve that you'll see drafts of these documents within the next month or so for consideration. So I'd like to get some feedback in between meetings, so by the time we get to June, we're really well vetted and prepared for approval. Just a note, I've conferred with our general counsel. The last time we went through this process, we actually went through management committee to have these approved. The bylaws of the council actually state the audit committee should recommend policies for the audit committee. So we're gonna go that way this time. I'm not sure why we did the other direction the last time, but so we'll ask actually for approval from the audit committee that will then, at least the audit policy and the audit committee charter would go to the full council for full council approval. The audit department charter actually falls within your purview as audit committee. So just want to touch base on a little bit of housekeeping there. Certainly expecting to get those documents ready. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the other the framework discussion. I also just, it was part of our EQA, but I will plan on organizing a training session for all committee members once we have our new full committee seated, which would just be probably an hour or two of going through the responsibilities. Certainly existing members who have been with us for a long time would be welcome to come and join and share your experiences, but I think it would, especially as part of the EQA, is make sure you have new training for new committee members, so look for that. Just and touch briefly on department staffing. We have one open position right now. It's for the audit manager position. Tim Larson's been serving in that now for several months while we recruit for the position full time. So just note that. Just going briefly through kind of the annual progress. These are the completed audits, so this includes the risk management that you'll hear today, and several audits that we talked about last December. They were on the plan but are finished now. Here is the list of audits that we're working on right now. You'll hear a little bit about IT facility security today. That's one where we presented a few different times. We're splitting up for a couple of reasons. And just a range of places that we are with these. I'll just note that we're our first two audits that Towson Solutions is working on are underway now. We've sent initiation letters and are gathering documents on the fourth incinerator construction and the gold line closeout respectively. So kind of beginnings and ends of construction projects on that. This is also kind of an EQA ask to talk a little bit more about working to clarify around our advisory work. So this is that it used to be called consulting in the standards, now it's called advisory, but it's things that we work on that aren't necessarily fully audits or fully in the audit plan, but I think that we've spent some time on. And I'll just mention these in brief, just so you're aware that we're working on it and we've provided some input. So Solar Gardens is an energy program that we've had for a number of years. Nick was on my team, he's out today, but he could probably speak better to the details, but this is just some invoicing challenges. These companies have had they change hands a lot. There's a lot of confusing and contracts get updated. Tracking who is who and who we should be paying can sometimes be a challenge. So we've been working through with several stakeholders, both in environmental services and Metro Transit, on making sure we're clear about our payment structure on that. So we've just mostly been going along and kind of trying to understand and offer some advice along the way. The Metro Mobility, Metro Move payments. This is just our new Metro Move program is designed for a specific purpose, and we have I think there's some unintended consequences with how day service providers are selecting between Metro Mobility and Metro Move. So it's something that I've not been working hard on, but I'm aware of and helping the MTS team kind of work through making sure that the payments are sort of made the right way and that we're getting the right value of that program. And the final is video use and controls. We've over time had a lot of, concerns, evidence of, misuse of video, or the video gets leaked out for some reason or another. And we've also done some investigative work around video. So really this is something that I've been kind of compiling some of this information and putting it into a memo form with some recommendations, not just me, but working with other people who have a vested interest in video, to try to put some better form around how we use video. We have vast video systems, a lot of data, and still have requirements in Minnesota Government Data Practices Act to adhere to, so some work in that space. Don't try to read this. We'll talk about this more in detail when I get to the Q&A. This is kind of what I was talking about. I'm holding space here because part of my CAA report going forward will be implementation and progress reports every meeting in terms of how we're meeting the objectives. So I will just address that there's 6 action items. I shared this with the committee and senior management following the EQA. 6 buckets of things that we're doing to address all of the EQA responses and partially conformed areas, and also the gap analysis. So this is just how I've sort of framed things and how we plan to respond. I think it covers everything in the EQA. And so you'll see this every meeting in some form, just progress updates to walk through these 6 action items. And also kind of give you space to ask questions about our progress. So with that, I'm gonna ask Tim and Brenda to come up. And I can take questions now, or if you want to just wait, we're gonna walk through, if you want to introduce agenda item 2, this is probably the right spot to do it.
Yeah, so, item number 2 is external quality assessment review response. Any questions from Matt initially? Go ahead, Tim. Jump in.
There we go. Do you want me to click or do you want to click?
I can click, you're already on your way.
All right, so I'll just introduce this briefly. Yeah, this is kind of like trying to dance around talking about the EQ I had having to talk about before. So if you recall, at our October meeting, we had a panel of peer reviewers from other transit agencies convened by APTA that went through a IIA branded peer review cycle. So the goal of this was to look at the internal audit function and make sure that we're partially generally conforming with all of the standards that IA has globally. One of the notes here is that this was conducted last year, so we were still under the old IA standards. Those have now turned over to the new global internal audit standards as of January 9th. And so we also asked the peer review panel to do a gap analysis of our current practices with future standards. So we were not just asking them to evaluate us against the old, but also the new going forward. So we had 2 reports, that's what we're gonna walk through today, that, go through our practices and offer recommendations to meet the old standards, the new standards, and everything in between. So I think the headline here and the good news was that we generally conformed overall, which is the goal, is to have the general conformance. We have all the peer reviews that I've been part of since I've been here, we've had generally conforms. But certainly we had good feedback from both internal audit staff and from senior management in terms of our practices. In general, we had an 85% positive response rate on both sides. Tim and Brendan are gonna walk through a little bit of just some color, and I've sent this all to you, so I'm sure you've read every single word in detail. So maybe this will be redundant, but we're just gonna go through some of the highlights. And again, kind of the plan you couldn't read a little bit earlier, we'll talk through some of that, our plan to respond. So, Tim, Brennan.
Thanks, Matt. The first section here is related to the conformance gaps between our practice and the standards. There are 7 general areas here, the first being resourcing. As Matt mentioned, feedback on the audit activity is very positive, and there's a lot of work that is being asked of us, but we don't necessarily have the resources. They described us as overextended a few different times. Additionally, under this resourcing, it also includes staff development to meet a couple areas where we have some work, but we also have areas to improve, such as with cybersecurity auditing. The second area is the charter policy manual. Essentially, this is an area where some of these documents haven't been updated since 2019 in the last round of reviews. There's also a few specific areas that we can strengthen the manual in, such as in advisory services, linkage to strategic objectives throughout the organization, our use of key tools like the risk and control matrix, and then documenting how we're doing our procedures and supervising. Third area here is chief audit executive roles. As many of you are aware, Matt had a role during emergency planning in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's also some management responsibility, sorry, that's a phrase we want to avoid. But just some work in terms of investigations and trying to figure out how do we draw the lines between what is the audit work and what is non-audit work that the department is also performing. With data access, there are some areas where the peer reviewers felt that better access to data would help us with our risk assessments and conducting our audit work. These areas were often justified by compliance or security concerns, but they noted that that wasn't necessarily uniform. Then with quality assurance and improvement purposes, there's a lot that we do in this area. We just can do a better job of writing it down. I know, for instance, we have a process improvement time code that we use. I keep track of that data on the dashboard, but again, how can we do a better job of documenting that and making sure we're having it in a central place. And then under reporting, they recommended that we use auditors' opinions to help explain our takes on the situation better, as well as getting a documented process to report when we believe management is taking on unacceptable risk and escalating that to senior management and the board. And finally, follow-up. We do some activities here, but we only have a draft standard operating procedure and it's not being implemented consistently. So that's another area for us to improve and, again, document what we do and do what we have documented. And then they also had some areas with improvement opportunities. So the two really big ones here are to do a policy and procedure refresh, so updating the manual, charter, other pieces of that, as well as creating and updating procedures for some of these key audit activities. In here, that also includes documenting supervision, which both of these areas help with because the audit software, which we're working on being able to implement, will also help with improving documentation, keeping track of supervisory activities, and automating and centralizing some of our work. And then finally, also in here, the use of KPIs is something that they mentioned, specifically the percent of audit plan completed.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
before we go on? Back to the conformance gap of data access, I'm wondering if the current charter mentions that you are to have unrestricted access to the data.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it does pretty plainly state that. I would say we've had 99% compliance. There's pretty much one area where we struggled, and that's the body-worn cameras. We're making progress in that space. And I would say right now we're on a good path to get the access we need and do the audit work we need to do. It's really, actually the last few months has been more of a matter of timing. Our team that is gonna work on that is working on IT facility security, so we haven't been, and there has been an external third-party audit of the body-worn cameras to meet the statute. So, but I think we're on a better path there, but it has been clear, and I think in most cases it's been complied with. Thanks for the question.
I have a question too. Back on slide 7, about resources, are there certain trainings or certificates that we should be budgeting to help our staff go to these certain trainings or obtain them?
Mr. Chair, yes and we do. So I would, the CIA, if I'm answering your question correctly, so the Certified Internal Auditor certification is what I think would be considered the gold standard for internal auditors. I have a CIA, Tim has a CIA, I think we have 4 or 5, if I'm looking at the staff, they're working towards their CIA and passed at least one exam. So we've provided resources to the team. We will pay for their training and at least one attempt at the passing the exams. It's a 3-part exam. It's very challenging. It's a 50% pass rate, as many of us who have gone through it can attest to. But yes, we do, and we also support, Tim's working on, or has a CISA, which is a information security auditor training, and cybersecurity training as well. And we've, part of our plan in the past and what will be part of our strategy and training and performance standards in the future will be focusing on which standards will help us, sort of drive not only our internal audit skills, but, the sort of the 21st century component where like everything is IT now, and getting up to speed and being up to speed on AI and looking at their certifications can be the most helpful. Hopefully that answers.
Yep.
Okay. I'll tackle the first. So what we're going to go through is the 6 action items, and again, we've shared this and we've talked a little bit about it, but I'll go through the first one. So policies and charters, I mentioned, you'll see drafts of these to conform to new standards and respond to all of the EQA recommendations. Probably within the next month, we'll start going through the vetting process. Key improvements, Brenda mentioned the roles that I play in terms of during the pandemic and also investigations. Those are areas that we need to, I think the key probably is the safeguards and just understanding, to the extent that I'm involved or my position is involved in those areas, how are we ensuring that it can be audited by somebody else or there's oversight on that role to the extent we need to. So gonna think through, that's part of the reason this is just, it's a more daunting task, I think, than just redlining a document, and we really have to think through like, how does this play out, and what are the right safeguards to have in place? There's other things that are just, that we'll bake in, so there's kind of a list you can see on the screen, and we'll also make sure that we bake into the audit committee's work plan that we started to do, that this will go every year. So we'll have just a meeting every year where we're gonna bring the new charter, or the charters up just for consideration and see if there's any changes we need to make. So look for that coming soon.
Yeah, good, committee
Yeah,
members.
thanks, Shirley. So a couple of comments or thoughts on this. So for the non-audit roles, and this is something we can talk about more offline, an approach I'm taking at the university is informing the committee, at least annually, what are those roles in which I'm playing, and so that the committee would then, audit committee would then have an ability to say, we don't want you doing that, or we don't want to take that, because as you're saying, in effect, by you being in an operational role, it means that your department can't audit it, so then we would have to bring in an external audit in order to do that. For the most part, for me, it is only things also that have been assigned to me by the board, in which I'm really doing that. So, it's a little bit cleaner, but even just having a report, I think, would be helpful. I mean, my only other comment, this kind of goes back to the access to information. I really do believe that that's one of the most important roles that an audit committee plays, is to make sure that you are getting that. And I think if you are in a situation, I understand there's different legal questions that can come up, et cetera, where your folks aren't able to get information. I think that is vitally important to be escalated, at least to the chair, and even to the chair of the board, and that should be something that we need to be helping you with, to make sure that you're being able to maintain that access, because the charter's worth nothing if people aren't going to follow it. So, thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Mike.
Moving on to the audit manual, the refresh that we're going to be doing. So again, we're doing this partly because there's new standards that are coming through, and then there's the conformance gaps and improvement opportunities that the EQA had identified. So there's, again, Matt had mentioned the memo that went out back in February. There's a list of them, but some of the ones that we want to highlight, again, formally documenting how we go about doing a risk assessment, linking to strategic goals, how we communicate on acceptable risks and how that's escalated. A reference to the QAIP, which I'll talk about in a later slide, how we go about monitoring and reporting KPIs, and then they had a recommendation about using reports so we can easily redact information. As far as the software, so we are hoping to have something picked out by the end of March or shortly thereafter, with the goal of having it implemented by the end of this year. And then as far as the strategic plan, so that'll get reviewed and updated as well, reviewing the mission, vision, and values. And then making sure that we're in alignment, our strategic plan is in alignment with not only the mentioned 2050, but other divisions' strategic plans as well. Staff development and resourcing, we touched on this a little bit, again, to your point of making sure that we have staff that are capable of auditing or assessing key risks that we've identified. If not, then we can use third parties if needed, and then incorporating any new KPIs that we identify. Performance standards and training. So we do review and update performance standards annually. However, we need to take that through the lens of, again, the standards. Particularly, there's a portion about including professional courage as a criteria for performance. And then having a more formal and documented onboarding process. We do have something that we do, but again, it could be better defined, better implemented. And then finally, last but not least, the QAIP. So again, we don't have anything formally documented right now, as we mentioned, but that'll be developed as the year goes on. And again, some of the things that'll include reporting and monitoring methods, and then the CAA talking about training and professional development of the department. And just a little bit of a timeline. So mentioned the policy, the charters, those will all come through for the next audit committee. We have begun with the audit manual refresh. We start with the checklist. We're updating that. That's more or less done. It needs to be reviewed and approved. And then the software selection hopefully by, again, the end of this month. And then as Matt mentioned, throughout the course of this year, we'll provide updates, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions about the progress that's being made on any of these items. With the goal being we'll have a fully updated manual, a QAIP, and a software hopefully implemented by the end of this year. So should be exciting, should be fun, should be interesting. take any more questions.
Yeah, any questions or comments from the presenters? All right.
Well, just can I just summarize it?
Yeah.
I think that, like, to put a bow on this, like, our audit team, I think the last couple of years, we've grown, we've become more sophisticated. I think all of these steps are gonna kind of get us from that like mid-level maturity, kind of like just below halfway, just above halfway. I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape, but I think we've gotten to a point now where we're ready for things like sophisticated software and kind of that next level of approach. So I think this can be read as like, we made good progress, but we acknowledge, like we tell all of our auditees, like there's always more to be made and we can obviously do a little bit better. So I appreciate the staff's work on getting all this together and feedback we've gotten from everyone on the process, so.
Thanks, gentlemen. Next report is the risk management report, this is Stephen Hamlin and Brittany Hartford and Ian Klein.
Good afternoon, committee chair. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Stephen Hamlin. I'm here with my colleagues Brenna Batchfield and Ian Klein to present the risk management audit. Just a little background to what risk management does in the council. This is a council-wide activity, primarily in charge of controlling our exposure to loss. And they do this through a variety of ways, including procuring insurance to cover certain activities that we have, and also in cases where we do not procure insurance, they also ensure that we do have the budget, we do have the money set aside and administer some of these policies as well. Sometime in 2020, they engaged a consultant, Ian, to review the entire process, our work comp process, our insurance processes, and our general risk management processes in a bid to kind of improve and to curtail what we, at the time deemed as a hockey stick and exponentially increasing workers' compensation claim. And so the recommendations of this engagement is also part of the focus of this audit. Sometime during that same period, they also implemented a risk management information system, which is here referred to as Origami. And therefore, you also hear a little bit more about them. Just to give you a little bit of background to the statistics that we found whilst going through this audit. And for workers' compensation in 2022, they paid $4.13 million for 220 claims. And in 2023, 4.58 million for 236 claims. And this is just for BAS. The next highest statistic is also regarding our police force, where in 2022 they paid 1.35 million for just 86 claims. And then in 2023, 1.41 million for 45 claims. These statistics, also speak to the reasons why we carried out the audit, and I'll go through to liability. For liability claims, the two highest ones are the auto liability and then the property liability as well. In 2022, they paid $2.3 million for 1,290 claims. In 2023, $2.1 million for 1,231 claims. And also for property, in 2022, they did pay $858,000 for 954 claims. In 2023, it came down a little to $508,000 for 924 claims. So there's been some progress in that light, and we continue to make progress. With this statistic and the background, we set out to achieve three main objectives for this audit. The first one was to ensure that the claim review process was in compliance with all statutory requirements and risk management best practices that we can find. The second one, considering the fact that risk management is a council-wide and a shared activity, we also deemed it fit to look at the information shared between risk management and other departments, which essentially positively impacts the claim counts and the claim amounts. And so that was our second objective. The third objective was also to ensure that having implemented the origami system, which is a risk management information system, there are some guardrails, there are some securities around that whole process to ensure that the information and the data that we store in there are kind of guided by CIS best practices. And so with this, we found so many good things, but there are two findings that I'll hand over to my colleagues to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. The first finding here relates to return to work pathways for workers' compensation claims. So we found that the return to work pathway needs to be improved. This was also one of the things that Aon, the consultant, found back in 2020. Some new information here is that there's been an increasing percent of indemnity claims over the last few years. And indemnity claims are riskier because they often take longer to resolve because they involve lost time. They also cost more, again, because of that lost time, and often represent more serious injuries to employees. Something where you can't just go home and be better the next day, but where you may need to be out for a week or more. The majority of work comp claims come from Metro Transit. It makes sense, it's where most of our frontline workers are. And related to this return to work pathway, another area that the Aon report touched on that we continue to see in our assessment is that there's no light duty or transitional work program within Metro Transit. Additionally, there are no KPIs for managers of injured employees. So this could be things like, how are we doing at figuring out ways to bring them back, or checking in on them and making sure they're doing okay. Out of 15 work comp claims sampled, 7 at some point during recovery had a doctor's note that said they can return to work with restrictions. The other 8 either were medical only or never had a doctor's note saying yes with restrictions. It was sort of an all or nothing return process for those.
Councilmember.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on like the light duty transitional work program. I know within ATU that there are some very distinctly categorized job classifications. There's distinctions between cleaners and sweepers and some of these things that, is that one of the barriers to not having this kind of a program is the job class? If someone's an operator or a mechanic and then, coming back at some of these other lighter duty, maybe lighter duty jobs, but is it a job classification issue that's leading to part of the problem?
So some of the things that we heard in interviews with operations management and some of these other functions like safety or OC health didn't reference the ATU agreement specifically, but they did mention, if someone is hired to drive a bus and the work restriction is you cannot drive a bus, you can't necessarily accommodate no bus driving for a bus driver. But the specifics of cleaner versus sweeper versus helper, that didn't come up. And I believe there is a form of this light duty or transitional work program within ES. So we did put some folks in the different safety departments in contact with each other to hopefully try and figure out if there's some solutions we can find.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's probably complicated, so.
Of course, no.
This is my theory.
Yeah, and
If I could just interject here, like, this has been, as long as I've been here, this has been kind of a recurring issue. I know that in some of our conversations I was a part of, we have some new people in Metro Transit that have worked in other transit agencies and I think have some experience. So there's no question there's challenges here. It's not a simple solution or, there is a lot to think about, including contractual arrangements. But I think that there was an expression of, well, let's take another look at this and think about some ways to think creatively about it.
Finally, have we reached out? We've got a joint management labor safety committee. And they have, they come up with, their main thing is a summary of activities, but it feels like this might be something to bring to that group because you've got representatives from both groups and it might be a good thing to discuss. I think it's Andrew Brooks.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll make sure I circle back with Andrew as we think about follow-up too. Those are good points to raise and discussions we have, so I don't know the answer off.
I don't either, that's why I asked. So.
all right. Yeah, so back to the little tree here, under that 7 cleared with restrictions, only 2 of those claims were able to be accommodated, both in the form of shorter shifts. The other 5 were not accommodated, and following that first doctor's note saying they can return with restrictions, those 5 claims alone represent 99 days of lost time and about $16,000 in lost wages that we paid. So it wasn't a true random sample, we can't necessarily extrapolate out, but it could be significant amounts there. So our recommendations are 1, for Metro Transit operations to work with occupational health and safety to set some KPIs for managers of injured employees. We left that fairly broad as to what that would look like, leaning on the expertise within those other departments. And then those other departments, again, OC Health and MT Safety, have some work either ongoing or that they'd like to get to in the near future, such as performing job hazard assessments and physical demand analyses for a lot of these frontline positions. And we recommend that they either continue, begin, or complete that work, because the information there could help support finding accommodations or opportunities for transitional duty. And finally, yes.
Alright, then another finding is that Origami, the risk management information system, should have its user access protocols updated. So our testing included a review of the list of roles and privileges granted to each role in Origami. And we found examples of roles that are outdated, and then some roles that had duplicate privileges of each other. And we also reviewed the list of council employees that had access to Origami. We found 1 former employee on that list. However, that employee would not have been able to access Origami anyway. There was a mitigating control in that an employee needs council credentials to complete the single sign-on process. So our recommendations are to develop work instructions so there can be more detailed descriptions of each role in Origami and the privileges granted to each role, to have a process for regularly reviewing the list of council employees with Origami access to ensure only those with a business need have access, and then to regularly review the list of roles and remove any that are no longer necessary.
With that,
Questions or comments for the presenter? Go ahead, Committee Member Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. For the AN report, and maybe I just missed this, who contracted to do that AN report? Was it risk management, or and who did that report go to? Because it seems like a number of these recommendations are already in that report, so just kind of curious about, was it just the pandemic, or what was it that resulted in some of these recommendations not getting implemented?
Take that. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the risk management did ask for that report. AN's our insurance broker. They consult with us frequently. As far as where the report goes, I don't know that it was, Phil's not here to speak directly to. He's off, he's getting insurance around the world this week. But I think it's a good question, and I think it's worth by following up on where the distribution was. And I think a question I have, we spend a lot of money on consulting reports, and I wonder often where they end up and what we're doing with recommendations. This is one of a few examples where we've started work and picked up a prior report and just taken that lens and put it through our work, because it's not uncommon to find this. So it's a good question. I don't know if we know, I don't know if I have a specific answer on where the distribution went to today, but an issue that I'm keenly focused on.
Chair Lee, Auditor Latour, and to be clear, this is not unique to my council. We have issues with, I find this at the university, where either we have an internal review or an external, and we say, well, what happened here? I think it's all the more reason, going back to the first item we were talking about, the importance of follow-up when we do, from audit reports. The difference between one of these consulting type reports that just get handed over and you don't know if anything ever happens, and an audit report is that follow-up. obviously, we wish that follow-up was happening on all of these items, that you won't have to come in and find the same issues, but I think it's important to close that gap, or close that circle.
As you were saying that, it reminded me that one of the new standard approaches is that assurance mapping of what else is assurance is happening around the organization you're working for, and
Yeah.
taking that into account during risk assessment. So we do that, and I think maybe just we could maybe play a role of being a little more, is having that collection maybe more than almost anybody else at the council, like being clear in our risk assessments and some of those documents about where we see assurance, and at least turn over the cards of like, this is around the council where we're seeing this, and maybe that creates exposure and incentive to follow up a little more on the results.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I would just add that I think also now that these findings are being reported by internal audit versus an external consultant, there's that opportunity to keep an eye on these things and report status of whether or not those findings have been addressed or not. So I know we've talked a lot about that in this committee, making sure, I think that's that's one of the most, one of the things that distinguishes the function of internal audit from external audits being done is really that continual follow-up and reminder to the organization that issues that were addressed, risks that were identified need to be followed up on. And instituting a quarterly process for doing that or whatever, so that people know that you, unlike maybe an external consultant who goes away, you guys aren't gonna forget that these were issues that were identified.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Next, we have our information items. Our next scheduled audit committee meeting is June 17th. And next we have financial internal control with Mary Henderson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Marie Henderson. I'm the Deputy CFO. Matt has asked me to just give you an update on a couple projects. I don't have a presentation, so more of a conversation today about two topics and two projects that are coming up that I'm pretty excited about. The first one was in October. Townsend Consulting Group was here to explain to everyone that our bank rec has not balanced here at the council. They gave some recommendations, but really at the end of the day, the bank rec still is not balanced. So I've taken on that task. I have solicited a couple of contractors. Instead of going through a formal RFP, we're using the formal powers of the council in statutory, that because it's professional services, we can pick. I did go to two different consulting firms. One wanted to just send a contractor over and say that we can, balance your bank rec. The other one is doing a project approach, and we'll be moving forward with that one. We have a very complex system, and I would say that, accounting 101 classes, you balance your bank rec. It's how hard is it? Our payroll system is not integrated with the general ledger. It's a manual subsystem. Our AP processes are different from our Metro Transit AP group to the rest of the council. There's a lot of manual processes that all fold into one bank account. That's a sweeping account, so it becomes very complex with the billions of dollars that go through it. The good news is that the balance is less than 50K that we're talking about. So it's immaterial. In the past, we've been writing off those balances and saying we're fine. I don't know if we're fine. I don't know if I have a people issue. I don't know if I have a system issue. It's not material, but it's still an issue. So we're gonna move forward with that project. Right now it's in the procurement phase, redlining with contracts, and hopefully we'll get them in soon. And hopefully with the team of people that are coming in, we will dig and I'll have better news to share with all of you on that project, hopefully even in the next audit committee. But it might be the next one after that. But we're moving forward on that. The second project then is internal controls. I'm really excited about this one. I went to the executive committee to explain that I would like to move forward to have contractors in. We have controls here. They're not documented well. We don't have control matrices. We don't have anything tied anywhere, and we've lost the why of what we're doing things. So as new staff comes in, we've lost that, and I don't know why we're doing that, so we would drop it. The team of consultants, again, going through consultants and looking at their projects and their recommendations, bringing in a group of people, consultants again. The executive team gave me permission to go forward with a small study of this. So it's not a full scope of the council, but it will be financial controls. And it will go as long as my budget runs for this year. So I have proof of concept of the documentation. It will tie perfectly into the software system that we'll have in place. So it won't be Excel spreadsheets, that we'll be able to have these controls documented. They'll be self-monitoring through the managers so that the audit team doesn't have to go in and the first step is, what are your controls? They will already be tested. That will tie in then to the third triangle, which is our risk management side of it too. After that budget is exhausted, which, you know, depending on when they're in, hopefully late fall, early winter again. I'll be able to then go back to the executive team with proof of concept and hopefully then with the buy-in of this committee and the executive team that will eventually roll out to other areas of controls. IS, HR, procurement, and our project offices and all those non-financial areas too. So that's my update. Any questions? I'll be happy to address.
Questions, comments from any?
Yes, Chair Lee, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Has the council ever considered investing in an enterprise resource planning system? It's a big lift.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering,
So do you,
like an integrated PeopleSoft application or something like that, so you don't have
So, Mr. Chair and committee members, so we are going through what they're calling BPSI, and I paused because I'm like, what does that even stand for? Business Process Integration Systems.
yeah.
And so it's adding in our asset management system, timekeeping. We're looking at the core of PeopleSoft to upgrade. We're a couple years behind on what they call PUM and tools, I'm hearing. These are all IS terms. So, but to address like why went in 2000 when PeopleSoft was implemented and PeopleSoft was not integrated, that is not on anybody's radar.
so you do have PeopleSoft.
We do have PeopleSoft, but it's not implemented the way it should be.
The BPSI project is, it's a PeopleSoft augmentation, if I understand it correctly, where it's to build some components around PeopleSoft to help. But we do have, that's our ERP system of record is PeopleSoft for HR and finance.
I have another
Yeah, go ahead.
question, and I didn't want to ask this when the auditors were here, the state auditors, but I'm wondering your reaction to the GASB changes that they've outlined. And do you find any of those to be particularly challenging?
Mr. Chair and committee members, some of the GASBs, I think my old boss would say GASB in all their wisdom, are just trying to put full disclosure around if an entity were to shut down, what would all be your costs? So the payroll one's a little bit tricky, 101 is. We have a lot of complex contracts. They all have accrual rates different, so that one will be hard to implement. Software, we are finding every reason not to put them on the balance sheet and, you know, justifiably not, you know, going around any controls. But some of the GASBs are very challenging and lack sometimes the value in what it adds to the financial statement readings.
But you feel like you're going to be able to have the resources to be in compliance with those uniforms?
Mr. Chair and committee members, my boss is sitting there and he has given me one more head count. I feel like I may need to be asking for more.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, that's a challenge for so many organizations to try to keep up with those usually annual and multiple changes to those rules.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I move that this meeting be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota statute section 13D.05 subdivision 3D to receive briefings or reports on security matters.
Thanks, Councilmember Lento. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the committee may by majority vote in a public meeting decide to hold a closed meeting to review confidential or non-public discussion at the closed portion of this meeting, of this committee meeting must be limited to discussions. No other public business may be discussed or transacted during the closed portion. At this point, Greg's gonna stop recording it.
Correct.
And we're gonna adjourn the public portion of this meeting and we will not be coming back to the public meeting after this closed session. So the meeting, the audit committee meeting is adjourned.